Hey there, so a lot of you probably know if you followed our channel for any length of time that I absolutely love my Canon 28-70 2.0 RF lens. It is my baby. It has changed the way I shoot. I love it. However, there are some pitfalls that I think you may run into, especially if you don't have a background shooting primes. So before we dive into this, you have to understand my background and my experience with primes versus zoom lenses, or else none of this is going to make sense to you. So I have been a wedding photographer and I did over a decade of shooting with only primes. So I had the 35, the 50, and the 85 millimeters. And there's an age-old debate about are primes better than zoom lenses. People have their very strong opinions, and I was always in the camp of prime until the day I die. Nothing will ever change that. And then the 28-70 2.0 came out and my world was flipped upside down and I had to eat my words because there's a lot of pros to primes. Back in the day, primes were traditionally sharper. They let in more light. There was a creativity constraint of having a fixed focal length that allowed me honestly to define a lot of my style. There's a lot of really cool things about using primes that I lived by those pros. That's why I chose that. So some of the cons for shooting with a zoom lens were they were heavier. They were traditionally not as sharp. They didn't let in enough light. They didn't have wide apertures. And my style thrived. I had to have wider apertures for my style. So everything changed when the 28-70 2.0 came out because all of the cons of using zoom lenses were no more. Those were gone because it was fixed. I could shoot at 2.0. It was heavy, but it was super sharp. So I evolved into like, okay, I will accept this as my new reality. And I loved it. And it's changed everything about how I even prep for wedding days, how I shoot wedding days, how I shoot portrait sessions. However, there are some awesome pros to the 28-70 2.0 that I am still to this day obsessed with. There also are some negative things about using this lens that I think can be avoided if you are just aware of them. So I'm going to break those down right now. First one would be the lack of consistency. So this potential pitfall comes from the idea that if you understand focal lengths and how using different focal lengths defines an overall look of someone's style, this is something that could be lost when all of a sudden the constraint of using a set fixed focal length of primes is taken away and it's a constant free-for-all with a 28-70. So we have to understand that every focal length has a different look, vibe, and feel. So a tight portrait with a 35 millimeter is going to feel completely different than a tight portrait with an 85 millimeter, and neither is right or wrong. If you don't have the constraints of using primes, it may be a little bit more difficult for you to create a consistent style because you can do anything you want. Is that a bad thing? It's not a bad thing. But I think I learned a lot about what I love shooting and the focal lengths that I love for different parts of the day and what defined my style because I had the constraints of using only prime lenses. If you're photographing a bride getting into her dress before the ceremony on a wedding day, for me, I spent a decade always knowing, oh, she's getting her dress. So I will get my 35 and I shoot her getting into her dress with a 35 millimeter. Bridesmaids are helping put her shoes on. I got to fit everybody in. And because I was using a prime, that would force me to be a certain distance from her. And I would stay in that distance until it was time to change up the focal length. And so that distance means that every single gallery that I was photographing, has a similar look to it because I was always standing, for the most part, the same distance away because I'm always using that same lens that doesn't zoom in and out. And so I'm stuck at that focal length. So my work and the way that I captured certain elements of a wedding day, there was a consistent feel to them. All of that changes if you have a lens where you can zoom in and out and have a free-for-all. It is easier. And it's not a bad thing. I genuinely love that I have so much freedom. I can get the full body shot, but if she's laughing with a bridesmaid, I can zoom in and get her laughing and it's tighter with higher compression. That's a good thing. That's why I love this new lens. However, if you are learning how to be a photographer and growing your business with this lens, you have to understand that you might want to add in some extra intentionality about the style that you're going for instead of it just being a happy free-for-all. So another potential pitfall with the 28-70 2.0 is there can be a lack of creativity. And let me explain this. With a prime lens, I would back up in order to maybe have a wider composition or fit my couple in or whatever, and I had to move around versus standing in one spot and just zooming out to fit everybody in. There's actually, and I don't know the neuroscience behind this, but there's actually a correlation between movement and brain activity. So I think I probably had some more creative ideas when I was forced to move around. And one example of that would be when I would have to back up to fit somebody in with a longer focal length prime lens, a lot of times that's when I would discover foreground. So if I'm backing up and all of a sudden now there's a branch coming in because I just backed behind a tree branch, now I have this soft extra layer of foreground, and it framed the client more perfectly. I feel like I taught myself so much more about ultimately what my style was and how I could be creatively looking for that style everywhere that I was shooting, because I was moving so much. I mean, it would be interesting to look at our membership footage. So KJL Access started right kind of around the time. No, it started before.
Years of prime.
There are years of prime lens usage. It would be interesting to look back and compare my movement versus prime usage and my 28-70, my zoom lens usage, because I remember strategically when I was shooting thinking like, oh man, like if I want the look that I'm known for, I'm gonna have to remember to move my feet. If you don't move your feet and you find yourself sitting in one spot, just zooming in and out, I would question, are you losing a little bit of your creativity that you would have using a collection of primes, or even just the 50mm by itself potentially? Are you losing a little bit of that creativity because there is no movement involved, because you don't technically have to move when you're using a zoom lens? So don't get me wrong, the ability to zoom in and out, there are times for that, and it is so wonderful. Like photojournalistic parts of the day where you're just capturing what is happening, being able to zoom in and zoom out during candid moments, that is amazing. I mean, you don't want to lose that. That's one of the best things about this lens. But for more of the artistic parts of the day, when you're creating portraits and you're framing and using composition, you have more control. Sometimes the ability just to stand in one spot and zoom in and out, you can stop being intentional and you can lose some of your creativity because you could just be a little lazy about it. You can just stand there and be like, well, this is fine. Whereas with a prime, you have to back up and you have to start moving and figuring out how can I fit it all in. And it forced me to access a part of my brain that a zoom lens, if I'm not careful, doesn't require me to access. So the third potential pitfall of using the 28-70 versus prime lenses would be the loss of intentional composition. Okay, so I have found in all areas of my life and in business, there's more creativity within constraints. And I found that in marketing, I found that in even room design, home design. If you can just do whatever you want to do and there's no constraints, the creative process is actually hindered because it's just too much, right? So when I was using primes, I was constantly looking at a scenario, and I had more ability to focus on how I was going to frame it compositionally, how I was going to back up and use certain lead lines, because I only had one chance of fitting it into the frame. But with a zoom lens, I could stand in front of a tree and just zoom out and have the whole tree and the couple, whereas with a 50mm, I would have had to strategically pull the couple out in front and then look through my lens and make sure I was fitting in the tree in the background. And I had tighter framed compositions, and my portraits had a little bit more intentionality because I was forced into it. So compositionally, is it a bad thing to have a free-for-all? No, I can fit so much more in. I have so much more variety. However, if I want some of the epic compositions that I became known for as a photographer for the last 14 years, I have to think about, what would I do if I was shooting with a prime? I think I should back up and shoot at 70mm with this tree instead of shooting closer to the tree, having less depth of field and just plopping my client right underneath the branch. Instead, let's pull them out from under the branch. I'm going to move way back in this field, and I'm going to shoot this epic portrait that's wide at 70mm because the composition is going to look more epic that way. If you don't have a background that has trained you to realize that there's more epicness and there's more opportunity if you play around with your focal lengths in conjunction with creating composition, you could potentially miss out on this. So I am thankful for all the years that I did not use a zoom lens, because I learned so much about framing and composition through the lens of my primes. So in conclusion, wrapping this up, do I think you shouldn't buy this lens? No, I love this lens. Everything I've ever said about this lens is still true to this day. It is one of the greatest advancements in technology, I think, in the Canon world in a very long time. love this lens. However, how can you apply this intentionality? What's one way to apply it practically? I think something that could help you would be when you're shooting. Now there's some moments where you just have to do what you have to do. And these aren't the moments that I'm talking about. I'm talking about when you have the control and the ability to make intentional decisions. Ask yourself why you're making them. Why are you shooting at 35 millimeters in this moment? It's because you want the width and you want the lines of the porch you're shooting on to bring in some cool composition? Or are you just haphazardly shooting and there's not really a why to your focal length? You're just shooting. That's fine. If you want to harness the power of consistency and composition and creativity in your work, it will help you to think through, why am I choosing this focal length in this moment? Am I trying to use higher compression, blur out the background because it's just a distraction? Am I trying to use higher compression so that tree branch will pop but the rest will blur away? Think about your why in the moments when you have artistic control, and you will avoid the potential pitfalls of using a zoom lens versus a prime. Okay, so if this was helpful, if you love this, if you are just desperate to learn more about the 28-70, I have a whole playlist about this lens. I do truly love it. I gave it a hard time today, but I do truly love it. Like and subscribe if you don't want to miss any videos in the future. I feel like this channel is a great place for non-techie tech reviews. I also have a lot of great tutorials in Lightroom. If you want to watch me shoot behind the scenes, actually see me use this lens in real life, even go back in the archives and watch me shoot with primes and see the difference. You can see me shoot weddings from the last 5 years, even other portrait sessions in KJ All Access, which is our affordable, amazing, real life way to learn photography and how to be a professional. It's only $29 a month. It's linked below. You can find it there. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.